Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's safe out there. I spent the day in my pajamas here in the house, and we are being allowed to work from home, obviously. But then the systems are not completely prepared for that, so lots of slowdowns and Jesus, such a chaos. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, my wife is a nurse. She's gonna be working just I think like 2 days this week. They're taking turns to make sure that not a lot of people get exposed. It sucks. Anyway.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
I was watching the video you recorded because I didn't catch the last class, and I
Yeah.
saw another guy was his wife was or girlfriend was a nurse.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah.
My wife as well is like a student nurse. Is that like a thing going on?
Oh, there you go.
My wife as well as a nurse.
She's a oh no, man.
What the hell's going on?
Jesus. Yeah, they are attracted to artists, man. What can we do? It's like,
Yeah, it's like footballers and models.
oh, there you go.
Schedules.
Man. Oh, yeah. Well, I was telling my kids today, I was like, this is new for us as well. This is not new just for you guys. It's the first time in our lifetimes you're, going through this. It's kind of crazy. So, yeah. Anyway, let's start this party here because since we are home, let's as well do some artwork and distract a little bit. So I'm gonna share my screen in here. All right. You guys can see it, right? Okay, cool. So that's basically where I stopped. I didn't want to go too far with the model, so instead of like going like in detailing and doing anything, I waited so we can do something today. And the thing that's interesting about the detailing by hand, it's like adding all those pores and stuff, is that I never know what's the right approach in terms of it's like when it comes to teaching. Because in the past, I would just go and detail whatever I was seeing. And then over time, I decided to actually say like, oh, let's just like add pores everywhere, like the last class. And then we start actually eliminating, blending things and turning them into something with more variation later. And although I like the approach for myself personally, because I'm kind of like, I know what I need to do. For my students, it seems like he added some complication, because it seems like all of a sudden everybody started like detailing everything with the same amount of pores and the same kind of like the same character of each one of the each part of the skin, in the face, instead of like really creating more variations. So sometimes I see work in progress and it's just like pores, and even though like it's like people are already adding some different details and trying to incorporate some more variations and stuff, you still can see through, it's like all the way to the end piece. Sometimes you still can see those pores pretty much like very mechanically placed. So I'm thinking about like going back to the first approach, which was let's just try to incorporate what we see instead of like cover the entire face with pores. And then just because that way you can actually focus on the areas that actually going to see some pores, and the other areas you're not going to see them at all. Otherwise, you're going to start seeing a lot of stuff where we shouldn't, just because I mentioned that. Oh, let's cover the whole thing. So I think I'm going to go for that approach again. It's like try to make you guys relax a little bit. So just add stuff where we need to add instead of like having to add and remove later. So the way we're gonna work on this is basically going to be in HD geometry. And the HD geometry has lots of limitations, just a disclaimer out there. I mean, like the way I approach those sculptures at home, I'm talking to you, I'm just like smoothing things out here. Stuff bothering me. The way I approach like the HD geometry thing is it's almost like a traditional piece of sculpture, So if you're going through the whole process of sculpting the base mesh and then blocking the secondary forms and then the tertiary forms later, you basically like that's what we're gonna have to do. It's like with your sculpture, you're gonna be placing like either with stamps, right? Like there are many techniques people use. Even like people are doing like 3D printing of skin detail nowadays and using that as a stamp to just like stamp the clay with it. There are like little kits, I think, like silicone, whatever materials they're using for that. even like little rolls and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. So the advantage of HD geometry is that you're gonna get a ton of detail, right? Like you can get like, in theory, like 1 billion polygons, but obviously we're gonna try to stay far away from that number. We're gonna try to keep around 100 million polygons. If less, better, right? But no less than, let's say, like 60 million for the entire head. Otherwise, you're gonna start getting into trouble trying to detail like pores. You're gonna start seeing like they're not quite crisp anymore. So I would say like between like 65 and maybe like 100, 110, no more than that. For a full body with HD, I would say that, you know, it's like in the past when we were detailing stuff for movies, we would do like a full body detailed and everything with around like 65 to 85 million polygons. So 65 to 85. And we would be able to basically like detail mostly like the head and the hands and some, you know, it's like of the body as well, but without like the same amount of detail. So the topology was planned more like for head and hands. But you see, like 85 is not much, right? Basically, we're gonna be adding like close to that just for the face and the shoulders in here. So if we're gonna go for something with this level of detail for the whole body, I would say a model around like between 200 and 250 million polygons for a full body HD model. It's totally doable. But then obviously HD doesn't allow you to sculpt everything at the same time, right? You're gonna have to actually go chunk by chunk. And each one of those chunks is gonna be around probably like 30 to 40 million polygons, kind of like gonna land around like 35 million polygons per chunk. So if you have like, let's say like a 250 million for the whole thing, you just have to remember that you're gonna be able to sculpt just like 30 million polygons at the time, you know, or 35, something like that. Disadvantage, you cannot sculpt in layers, so you cannot use layers for it, unless you do, for example, like just use the layers for the model before HD. So before you get HD, you can use some layers in there. But I never trusted layers in ZBrush at all because it's a little funky. You know, it's like if you use layers a lot, you're gonna realize that sometimes when you're painting color and then you're you know, it's like going back and forth with like different layers, you're like dialing in and out. Sometimes the colors get messed up. The shader gets messed up sometimes, you know, it's like a lot of stuff that happens that I don't trust the layers at all. And so I normally like sculpt if I need like different details for example, like just like a displacement map for veins, for example. I normally generate another displacement map with from a clean mesh just with the veins in it, and then the TDs at work, they basically like just blend those shaders and create like multiple layers of displacement. But in my own work, I sculpt everything in a single layer, pretty much like the way you would do like in sculpture. You know, it's like if something goes wrong, I basically like just erase and redo it. But I would say you guys can do whatever you need to do for your models. You know, it's like I know some people in the past in this class had problems with HD geometry for whatever reason, and they decided not to go HD. So they stuck with a model, for example, like just the head around like 40 million polygons or so. So if that's the case, if you really insist like using layers, for example, something you cannot not work with, just you stick with whatever you need. But for all of you who are curious about how the HD geometry works, I would strongly encourage you guys to try it out, because the great advantage is that you don't need to wait much to export those maps. You know, one thing that happens a lot, for example, like in production, let's say like you detail your model, so you have like your model like around, let's say like 40 million polygons, not even that high, like half of what we're going to be using here. And then all of a sudden you got a note, and then the note is that, okay, that area is overly detailed, so you're going to have to smooth it out, going to have to add more wrinkles here and there, blah, blah, blah. And then your supervisor asked you to do that work in the morning. And then let's say like those production models, you can get as much as 80 UDIMs in a single model, right? It's crazy how many UDIMs you get. In our case, we're going to be dealing with only like 5, maybe even 3 or 4. But let's say like in production, you have a model that has like 30 UDIMs. When you export the geometry or the displacement map out of a model that's not HD, this time is going to take, it's going to be like forever, you know. It's like you can set up sometimes at noon and you can wait for like 4, 5, 6 hours sometimes for the maps to be completely exported. If you have like this many, you know, UDIMs, like 30, 40 UDIMs, it's very slow. Even with five maps in here, for example, if I'm exporting 8K, which is going to be the case in here, if I exported non-HD, I could wait like a good chunk of time, even with this new computer, you know. But with HD geometry, the great advantage is that everything is stored in those kind of like virtual maps that are basically loaded every time you enter HD, you know, and safe when you get out of it. And then the cool thing about that is that when you're generating displacement maps, it kind of goes straight to those maps and reads them out instead of like having to calculate things like a regular subdiview would have to. And for example, my 5 8K maps are exported in between 6 and 8 minutes. So that means that while I was exporting all this stuff, I can keep working and then plug them. If it didn't work out very well, I can do, for example, like 3, 4 iterations in a single night. That would be impossible to do with this level of detail with non-HD. So that's the advantage of HD. Is just like if you want to iterate a lot, you know, it's basically like you can keep working on it forever. And then in terms of crashes and stuff like that, there's not a lot of crashes I noticed with HD. It's fairly stable when you're inside of it. Now the problem that I normally have, you try to avoid this. If you have your move topological on, and then you're in HD, basically like if you click the model anywhere, it's going to take forever to just return the control of the mouse, and sometimes it's going to crash as well, you know, because what happens is that it's trying to actually read the topology of that model that has like either like 40 million polygons in there. So just to you know, to make sure that everything is working and release the mouse for you, it takes sometimes like minutes, you know. So try to avoid having move topological when you're in HD. And just use the move masks if you need to. One thing that you can do when you're in HD, well, let's do some things here so I can actually show you in practice instead of like talking about it. So what I have in here so far, I have my model that the base mesh we already, you know, talked about how we planned it, right? How many polygons you want to know, we want to get at the end. So this model was planned to have around 70 something million polygons. So when I subdivide it, basically the subdivision levels here. So my base mesh is only 17,000 polys, right? And then if I subdivide once, I get 69, which is the model we're going to be exporting to Maya for rendering. And I'm going to explain why after, why I'm not using the lowest. So and then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 subdivision levels, and that's it. So like from 17 to 1, 2, 3 to 1.1 million polygons. So why am I not going like higher than 1.1 million polygons in here? It's because HD geometry, the optimal way to work with it is that you don't subdivide your mesh passing 2 million polygons. They actually, Pixologic say the same thing because it's optimal number, you know. It's like in order to be able to export those maps faster, you cannot pass like the 2 million polygons threshold. Sometimes they even say like you keep around 1 million. But I went as far as 2 million. It was fine to export the maps, you know. So in this case here, that's my threshold. If I subdivide again, obviously they're going to get 4.4 million polygons, and that passed the 2 million polygons. So I cannot go that way, right? In your case, you're going to have different topologies. So probably like, let's say you landed around like the 800,000 polys. Again, you cannot subdivide again, right? Because more than that's going to be like 4 times that. So that's 32, right? So that's going to be at 3.2 million polygons. So try to avoid that. Sometimes you're lucky, you know, you get the number that subdivided get really close to 2 million polygons. So it's pretty optimal in there, but it doesn't matter, you know. So that means that right now I'm maxed out in the amount of polygons I have non-HD. So basically like the way I did it was just by going to geometry, right? And then just clicking divide many times, right? So I got divide, and then I got to this number. Now, if I'm gonna go HD on this model, which is the objective here, I'm gonna click instead of like geometry, I'm gonna go geometry HD. And then I'm gonna subdivide HD. It's not gonna tell me anything in here because it's just like I said, it's subdividing virtually. It's not creating a subdivision in here. it's going to just like create a subdivision when I actually enter that mode. So the only way for me to see how many polygons I'm going to get, so you see like the number down here, it says like 3.7 mil. So I'm going to be subdividing it, and I'm going to make sure that I don't pass, let's say, 100 million polygons in there. So that means like 2.6 mil here are for the other objects in the scene, and 1.1 million is for the face, right? For this whole object in here. So I'm going to subdivide HD. Let's see. Make sure that you don't have any masks, right? For subdivision or subdivision HD, otherwise it's going to screw up your whole topology. And I'm going to go to 1, 2. You see the number increasing there, 20 million polygons now. And then I can tell I can go 1 higher, right? And that's it. So 73. So if I subdivide again, that number is going to, you know, almost like quadruple here. So I cannot do that. Otherwise, it's going to be too high. Again, like make sure you don't pass like 100 million polygons in there, something around that number. So the model for our intents and purposes is still the same. So nothing is happening here. But if you want to see a preview of whatever you're doing in HD, which is not the case, I don't have anything sculpted yet. But anytime you can just like rest your mouse outside of the model, not in the model, but outside like that, and press A. So it does kind of like a render, you know. So you render is like a little preview. So that's how it looks like in HD. But since we don't have anything sculpted, you know, it doesn't change that much, right? Now to go HD, it's the same thing. You're gonna press A, but instead of pressing A outside, you're gonna have to have your mouse resting on top of the model. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna make sure that I have my my polygroups in place. I'm gonna go to the lowest res just to make sure. The shortcut for lowest res is Shift D, and then to go to the highest is D, right? So you don't need to go to the menu, Shift D and D, just get used to that. And then polygroups, yeah, again, like if you do auto groups, nothing is gonna happen other than changing color because it's just like whatever is visible in there. UV groups takes into account the UDIMs, and this auto groups with UDIMs, with UV, takes into account the UDIMs and whatever is inside of the UDIMs, like all the little pieces, and splits everything into different polygroups. So that's basically what I'm gonna be using here. You can even do like temporarily something like this. For example, you can just hide all of those guys. I'm not gonna work on the ears for now, like that. And then, for example, like if you want something, the pocket inside of the mouth, I don't want to detail at all because it's closed. If you had it open, you probably would like to do that. But in this case, the pockets for eyes and the mouth, they're pretty much like I'm gonna be hiding them completely in there. And then what you can do here, you can actually, for example, like if you have your Control Shift, I'm gonna click this guy, select lasso. And now I can actually do something like, let's see, if I want to do something more perfect, I would do something like this, hide that piece, and then maybe, oops. Then maybe I can go down from here. Let's see. Yeah, I want to do something perfect, you know, it's like, it's just for a mask, but I mean, just showing you guys if you need to do something like this. You basically can do, let's just select that one, but very anal about it. And then you can create a polygroup of this, for example. So if you just click auto groups, now every time I need to unhide everything and just work on that area, you can just click inside of it. And now I'm ready to go HD in just this part. And then later I can just invert and, you know, detail the rest of it if I need to. So now that I have this piece here, I can go HD on it. So let's go to the highest resolution. Otherwise, it doesn't access the HD. Highest resolution. Make sure you have perspective off, because you want to make sure that you project. The way that HD works is basically like a cylindrical projection. So if you have your mouse around here, imagine that it's kind of like a cylinder being projected that way. So the focus is going to be a circle like this, and it's going to shoot through it. So that's why when you're in front of the model and you do the projection from the front, you only see a circle around the face, for example, right? But I like to do from the profile like that because it shoots and normally grabs more stuff. It's kind of more optimal. And I normally rest the mouse around here between the nose and the eyes. It's normally the most densely populated, you know, number of polygons in there. So I'm gonna rest right around here and then press A to go HD. So let's see how many polygons we get. We got the entire chunk. So basically like 32.3 million polygons. And I'm using so far here, let's see my memory, active memory, 8.7 million polygons, 8.7 gigabytes. And then I still have 96 gigabytes like left in there. So that means like you don't need a lot of memory to get to this point here. Later, you're gonna have to have access to more memory. But at this point here, even 32 gigabytes should handle it. 16 would be too little, but 32 should be just fine. 64, I say is ideal. It's like I never reach 64 working on those models. So I don't think you're gonna need like more than 64 at all. So now that's HD. Now we can start playing with the detail part of things, right? But before you do that, we need to create some brushes in here. But let's explore a few of them first. So I'm gonna be giving you some directions about like the brushes I'm using overall here. And then again, I'm gonna be using a lot of the stuff I was already using, like the inflate, this carve one that I show you how to create it. The topological, I'm gonna leave it alone for now to prevent any crashes in there. And then clay build up as well, gonna be using some of that. Now the clay build up, what I'm gonna change in here in relation to what I had before is that by default, it has this little square in there, right, for the alpha. So every time you sculpt something, you see like there's this marks, right, like kind of like a clay mark like that. So that I use a lot when I'm doing like sketches and stuff. But then when I'm in HD here, the best way is to actually click on it and switch to this alpha 35 in here, for example. And now when you use it, it's a much more smooth kind of build up, so everything's more organic. This one helps a lot, So I have a little pinch in here I have to correct. For example, if I do it stronger here so you can see, it's like it's a much more organic feel now for the clay build up. So that's basically what we're gonna be doing. Let me show you this. So another one we're gonna be using is this one here, which is a very useful one. I actually show in that talk for the summit, ZBrush Summit, which is basically like the skin random, not this one here, which is basically like, it's the regular standard brush. So if you don't know how to create it, you just click standard and then you go to brush and clone, start with a clone version of it. And then now you can actually add anything you want to it. So what I did, I actually added this, not this guy here, it's this one. I added this brush here, that's alpha 58, that's part of ZBrush already. So I can click on that one. And then for the stroke, I switched from dots to spray. And my spray has those parameters in here, which we're gonna be playing with as well. So the flow right now is 25, but we can play with this. This one is the one that's gonna make the most difference when we tweak it. And even if you do 0 in here, it's still not 0. It's still gonna produce some results. I normally, for certain things, I use at 0 actually. But let me show you what this one does so far. So I have my alpha in here. Instead of like add, I switch to Z sub, and I'm gonna increase my intensity here so you can see what goes on. So I have symmetry right now, which is the whole purpose of having symmetry is for us to be able to detail both sides symmetrically first, and then after we start breaking up. But this brushing here is basically what it does. See, like it has this kind of feel to it. It's kind of like a, it's like a stretched skin or something like that. I'm gonna go like lower intensity here a little bit. So you see like it has this, it's very directional. So for example, this one I use in combination with the pores themselves when I wanna add like direction. So for example, like if I wanna do around this area, after I have all the pores, I can just like blend the pores with something like, have those guys like with multiple sizes, just blending to kind of like add more direction, it's like, it really helps. But that only works in combination with some other detail, by itself, it doesn't look that great. Now, what this one does as well, which I really like, is to create like in-between detail to fill up certain areas, It's like there are certain areas that I mostly use just this alone without using any other alphas, which is basically this. For example, if I want to detail the back of the head itself, right? I use the same brush, but in circles. I might have to tweak the spray, but basically like this. So instead of like doing those lines like I did like that, I'm gonna just like use like a circular motion and just do this. And it creates this very organic kind of like a, leathery kind of feel to it. This one helps a lot, it's like for a lot of different areas. Obviously you have to use like with a smaller intensity. And if you want to create a little bit more space between them, you can use like a flow like 0.10 or something. Let's try slower here, 0. Something like that. So now it's a little bit more spread out, doesn't have the same amount. And then I would just say like, try not to go over the same spot many times because it starts getting very crunchy like this. And then you're gonna get very noisy in the middle, right? But if you do like, it's like go in circles like this without going over the same area many times, then you start getting at this kind of like leathery feel that I mentioned. I use this one, for example, like in between the pores sometimes to fill up some areas. Although we're gonna be using a lot of the procedural to create the macro displacement in between things. I still use this one in ZBrush as well, just to break things up, But before we start doing any detail here and get into the pores themselves, let's just observe some pictures here or reference stuff. So let's see, the first one we're gonna be looking, it's the, those are basically like photographs we took of each other at work like years ago. And this one here is a photo of my own skin. And I actually like it because my pores are very opened up, which is terrible and awesome for a reference at the same time. But, it's like when you look at the pores themselves, it look like something from a distance like that, right? You see the breakup in there, you can actually count them, right? You can actually count, you can do like an estimate by counting them. It's like you can bring it to Photoshop and start like 1, 2, 3, and just like put little dots of color inside of them. And you can actually count like in a chunk of skin like this, how many of those you have, but it just is a reference, obviously. But you see, like, for example, I observe the skin in here and I can tell that I can see the little pores in there. But then at some point, they're going to start disappearing. So up to here, they're pretty visible. I still see some of them under my nose in there. When I get like around here, they get more shallow, right? So get more specular and not a lot of breakups in between. There's not a lot of those little pillows in between the pores. They become more shallow. And then the pores are kind of isolated. They're not like in a network, right? I can see there's a network in here, the way they connect with each other, but I don't see this networking here. And then you're gonna start seeing all the way here, I still see pores, right? And then when you get around here to the eye bag, see like they completely vanish. So around here, there's this area here is a band. There's an area of blending here. So you start seeing the blend. You see here, I see pores. See, I don't see any here. See, yeah, I can see pores in here, not in here. See in here, not in here. So this whole area here, like no pores whatsoever. It's basically like, obviously you have like skin and everything in there that like different types of details, like this stretched skin in here and everything. But in terms of, it's like you don't see pores where you don't have a lot of hair going on in there, right? And then it changes, the detail gets more macro like that, more broken up. And then you get more bumps around here. You're gonna get lots of bumps. I have like those little, layers of like fat underneath, like little deposit of fat in there. And some people have those. I have some of those like around my lips as well. Some people have weird stuff with their skin. I have this stuff since I was young. And then when you get here and you start looking at the pore itself, you're gonna see there is this little pattern that they have. It looks like they shoot in different directions like that. So there's 1, 2, 3, like different, almost like little sun rays in there, right? Kind of like that. But you're gonna notice that, for example, like there is a fall off that's very important to capture in here. They're not isolated. For example, like if you see a hole in here, this hole is not isolated, for example, like it's not like a completely flat surface and then you have a hole in there, right? You see that it starts getting like deeper and deeper. It has a very kind of like bigger radius, right? If you look at this guy here, for example, there is a radius that goes all the way in here. And you get like those pillowy areas in here, right? So when you sculpt the pores, it's important that we capture that, you know, so that we can get this little feel that it's almost like they're being like pulled inside, right? So basically like there's a little like elastic inside and it's just like pulling them in. So it's almost like those little buttons, you know. The example I normally use is this one here. It's like a couch, right? But that's basically the same principle, you know. It's like you see like you get the little pore in there, pulling inwards, and then you get those little rays that are created because it's a soft surface and you know, around it, completely soft surface. And then from time to time, they kind of like almost like tend to connect to each other. You know, it's like if you have another one here, the pull is going to create more of those little wrinkles, and they're probably going to try to connect with each other. Obviously, this is a perfect distribution of them, and this doesn't happen with the actual skin. Like the distance is going to be going to have much more variations. So, for example, if you look at the skin here, you're going to see like the distance between this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. It's a very short distance between those guys in here, right? But then here, much further, right? And some of them, for example, are a little bit hidden here. There's one in here, there's one in here, one in here, one in here. So you see, it's not a perfect distance. And what happens is that sometimes when you try to make things too perfect, for example, like putting a distance like in perfect triangles, it reads completely mechanical, you know? So sometimes like I see some of my students like trying to add all the pores around the face, and the distance is just perfect between them. It just doesn't work, you know? It needs more variation than that. But roughly, they follow a structure, right? They tend to go in triangles. For example, like triangle right here, triangle upside down in here, another one in here, right? But the distance between them is like they're not like you know, same distance between the sides of those triangles. They're kind of like all over the place. So that's important to remember, you know. And then obviously, we're going to be talking about like those areas that we're going to need those guys fairly visible, which is normally like around the cheeks, right? You're going to see this orange peel kind of texture. And then in the muzzle, the same thing. Chin, same thing. Around here, you're going to see similar ones. Around the eyebrows and a little bit of the forehead is going to be a similar quality to the pores as well. But then there are areas that are completely different. For example, like the around the eyes, we already talked about. Basically, we're not going to add any pores in there. We're just going to try to capture this blend in here and make sure that the pores start fading away from very visible to almost nothing to completely nothing in here. And then we're going to be using the same brush we're going to create those pores for the nose as well, but taking into account that they're a little bit more isolated from each other. There's a macro vein in there, micro vein. The peach fuzz, very cool as well. You know, it's like, look how random this is. Different sizes. Yeah, some people have a lot more. There are a couple of references I saw in that website that with the super high res stuff that has like very, very a lot of them. Some people have a lot of them. And it comes from the different ethnicities as well. You know, some ethnicities have a lot more peach fuzz than others. And then obviously, you know, it's like you can see some disgusting nose hair in there. Like you can get an idea about thickness, you know, same for the beard in here. One thing that Arnold cannot do just yet is to calculate that little ingrown hair in there. To create an effect like that, Arnold has to use like a big scale. For example, if the model was gigantic, it would be able to penetrate that much and show that. But with our real world scale, it doesn't create an effect like that. In the past, I would use a trick to simulate something like that. But I tell you, man, sometimes this stuff is a little overkill, you know. Unless you want to go for really close-up shots and really try to create some like that, you know, it's a little overkill. So we're gonna be trying to capture some of this stuff, you know, it's like and see what we can do. The peach fuzz in here is interesting as well. I can see the little ones in there, but almost nothing. They're so tiny. And that's the thing, you know, it's like when you're doing peach fuzz, you're gonna see some of my work as well. I added way too much. Not too much, I mean, like they are too big. It's almost like, oh, if I'm adding peach fuzz, I want to make sure people see them. So, you know, but the real thing is that you barely see them, right? Like, I mean, like you take a picture, you're barely going to see them unless it's like an edge like this. And then when you see them, you see how thin they are in relation to an actual hair, right? It's like really, really tiny. So we have to, and also another thing here, we're going to be talking about hair later on. is that different qualities of hair, right? For example, like those guys here, they're fully grown hair. They're just tiny. There's like you know, tiny hairs, but they're fully grown here. So you see that when they're fully grown, they become like, they come to a point, right? So you see like they start a little thicker and they come to a tiny point right there. Same with this guy here, right? Coming from the nose, it was never chopped. But now you see those guys here, which are basically like growing from a shave, right? Then you're gonna see that they have like a square kind of tip. And this kind of stuff is important to keep in mind as well, you know. Then when you're playing with the profile of the hairs in XGen, we're gonna be talking about this, you know. It's like some of them are gonna need to come to a point from fully grown hair, and some of them, if it's something like a stubble, right? You wanna make sure that they end like in a square like that, right? And you see how complex it is too, right? If I zoom in into one of those, it's not just the little hair. It's like some gunk in there, you know. It's like that's basically growing from the skin. Some of them gonna have a little bit of dust, whatever it is, you know. That's kind of stuff like it's hard to capture in a real, in a render, you know. This stuff is like real life, so don't expect to be able to capture like real life stuff. What we're gonna do, we're gonna try to capture an impression of an actual human or creature, but without you know, having too many hopes that this is going to look real. It's going to look realistic probably, but not real. The eyelash is another nice example here, kind of like opening a segue here, but yeah, at least like for reference for thickness and stuff, you know, it's kind of cool to see it. So again, like the best reference you can have, please don't use my models as a reference or my screenshots as references. Use actual pictures, you know, photographs. Let's open, let's see, I think I can open with photos. Let's see if this one opens. Yeah, so this is from my friend, Sebastian. Actually, Bastian, yeah. His name, like, I don't remember, like, was, oh, it's Philip. Philip Bastian. So, yeah, this was basically like when he was at Thailand back in the day. And I took this picture of him. It's kind of like he's a very fair skinned guy. So it's a different type of pores in this case here, right? In relation to the ones you saw in my face in there. So you got, you know, some other stuff here. He has some, you know, like white hairs and white heads in there around here as well. And then, you know, a lot of, this one was the reference, I think, was for the pressure. So for example, like he's squeezing this whole area here. You see like the blood flow. Kind of like gets stuck around those areas here, and then it goes like pale yellow to greenish around those areas where the blood is being drained, right? Basically, like kind of like with the pressure in there, it just like cuts the circulation in those areas. So this is a nice reference because this is the similar color we're going to be using for areas where we don't have a lot of, you know, either we have like a lot of fat tissue underneath and not a lot of blood flow. For example, like some bone landmarks, you know, it's like areas of cartilage, let's say like ears, and, you know, it's like some of the nose cartilage as well. So we're going to be using a similar tone like this one, you know. So it's a cool reference in there. But again, use pictures and then try to use that website that's finally back to online. It was out for a couple of days. People sent me a couple of emails. But so Daniel Boshang, or whatever you pronounce it. So this website, and then if you find someone similar to your character, which in my case is going to be an old lady, I could go for this lady here, or maybe this lady around here. But you see, like they are not like, it's not the same type of skin, right? It's a different skin. They're pretty much like a lot of very white people in here. So it's not like a perfect reference for me, but I can get like, let's say this lady here, and then let's just zoom in. And then basically like use the wheel in your mouse to just zoom in. In her case, I still see plenty of pores in here, but you know, because she's not like a very, very old person, you still see a lot of that. So pores around here, like I said, around the muzzle, probably the chin as well, plenty of them. Forehead, close to the eyebrows, probably gonna see a lot still, right? But then everything around, going around here, obviously has a strong depth of field. It's going to be hard to see it. But around here, there are no pores at all, right? Like you're not going to be seeing them. It's almost like I see some echoes of what it could be, but it might be from those little bumps instead of the pores themselves, right? It's very cool reference. Like I said, that tone that I was mentioning before for eye bags and bone landmarks and for cartilage is this tone we are seeing right here. You know, it's like kind of pale like that. You're gonna see this probably like around the nose. You know, the tip right here. You see like some, you know, it's like whitish. Yeah. And then for example, like for the ears, you're probably gonna see the areas of cartilage, something similar, a little bit more pale like that too. So please, by all means, when you're sculpting your pores, if you're having trouble, for example, like what's the scale of the pores? How many I need to sculpt in a small chunk like this, you know? If you really wanna know how many, I would say like get a couple of those pictures and then count them and get a little sample, you know, so I can see, oh, okay, I know that the scale is about this many pores per, you know, I don't know, like square inch or something like that. And then always refer back to those references in high resolution, because that's the only way you can trust. The pores I'm going to be sculpting are basically like my own, you know, observation of what I see in terms of what I think the pores look like. And then, but there's a lot of other breakups in here, you know, it's like this type of like little crosshatch, kind of like little lines crossing between them. You can try to achieve that using that little spray that I will just show you guys, you know, to just like spray them and get more detail in between them. In her case here, they look fairly rounded, but then, yeah, depending on the type of pore, you know, but in terms of the fall off, you see like it's not just a tiny little dot. I see this whole area here has subsurface scattering. That means that this whole area is actually a hole that starts like very wide, kind of like a crater, right? And then goes and pinches into a little dot in the middle. So with that in mind, we're gonna keep this one like on the side for a second. Oh, before I do this, so I was showing this one that's this lady here is probably like in her, I don't know, like 50s, like early 50s maybe. I don't know how old she is, but then if you look at another lady, like this lady here, and then you see her pores. Look at the difference here, for example. Around here, you cannot see the pores anymore. Basically, like they become like a breakup. You see like little echoes of like where the pores were supposed to be, but it's almost like those little buttons in the couch start to lift, you know, it's like the elasticity is not there anymore. So basically like they start lifting and everything becomes more like a texture that's kind of like you don't have like those little rays. Sometimes you're going to find like this one here, you see like there's a little bit in there, but for the most part, it's almost like the other forms take over, you know, it's almost like those little triangles. It's almost like looking at the top of the skin of your hand, you know, becomes more like that, this kind of like little triangles. But then areas like this, you're still gonna see pores, you know, very, very little ones, but one here, another one there, very pale, you know, it's almost like they start lifting again. And then around here, you still see some around there, right? But then again, they start dissolving and becoming something else, you know, it's like those bigger folds start becoming like kind of like a little brain texture, right? Like they have like different ways of breaking up. Still see some black heads in there, right? A few ones. But yeah, it's always going to be dependent on the age your character is going to be. I did many times, for example, like sculpting this area with lots of pores to be able to show my students how to sculpt them. But then later on, I would have to remove it because it was just not working for, with an old person. You know, if you're going to go for someone really old, it's not going to match. You know, it's like it's going to look fake. So in my case, I'm probably going to add some of them and going to try to remove like slowly until I'm happy with it. But we're going to start doing some sculpting here. So the pores themselves. Let's take a look at what I have here. So I'm going to go to a plane 3D. And then to be able to sculpt it, I'm going to just click Make Polymesh 3D. And now I have this polygon that's like 1,000 polys basically. So it looks like this. So I'm going to subdivide a few times. So 1 time, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have like 1,000,000 polygons now just for this plane. So with 1,000,000 polygons, I can actually see a bunch of detail, right? So if I do something like that, I can actually see a good chunk of detail in there. So let's try to see how my pore here, my brush looks like. And again, like if you look at the skin in there, just to go back here for a second. Go to Karen instead. I mean, like you're gonna have the pore itself, right? But there's a lot of other stuff going on with the pore. In here, there's some directionality as well, which normally is sculpted by hand. So for example, like if I need them to look more stretched, I actually carve them to look like that by adding a little wrinkle on top of each one of them and then start blending more like this, right? But the pores themselves, you look, in her case, basically like it's a very round, and then all the breakup that's happening around it, it's almost like those little details from, you know, the surface of the top of your hand, like I was mentioned before, those little triangles, you know, in between. But it's never alone, you know, it's like there's always something going on in between the pores, right? So this is much more complex than the stuff that we can sculpt with a single pore. So we're gonna have to actually add some of this detail around it if you want to represent something similar to that. So let's just keep that one, and I'm gonna just go back here, and I'm gonna show you what I have for my main pore, which is basically just the first pass, right? So again, my own interpretation of it. So basically, like the single pore brush I have looks like this. So let's just draw. You're gonna see there's not a lot of sharpness or anything. It's very simple in look. It looks like this, right? If I go from the side, let's just display properties double. The important thing to notice here is how far the fall off goes. You see like this curve in here? It goes all the way. You know, it's like the biggest mistake is to make a tiny little dot. So for example, like if I do something like go with the full on intensity here, very much stronger, and I do something like this. See how different this is from this? Let's see the profile of the two of them. See, like it goes deep fast, right? Like the fall off is very short. And this one here, it's almost like a little mountain upside down like that. See, the fall off starts right here and goes, and then, you know, it's not even a super sharp geometry in there. Look, even those guys here, none of them are completely sharp. If you do it too sharp, it looks like fake as well, you know. So it's a very loose representation of a pore that then later on, obviously, we can mix with our other brush, this one here. And then I can even sharpen this, for example, like if you want to sharpen that alpha a little bit, you can go to your modify, and you can actually reduce like the, let's see where it is, intensity, fall off intensity, where is it, the blur? Oh man, it's been a while. Blur right here. So you can actually bring negative if you want. So we sharpen the whole thing. So I'm gonna bring this stroke to a 0 as flowing here. So this kind of stuff is the kind of breakup that is gonna show when you have, you know, the specular map. Basically, like it's gonna capture this kind of stuff in between them. So basically, like this is gonna be you know, a good thing to have if you have your pores in place later on to just do a pass to incorporate some of this stuff, you know, just to have more of that breakup in there. But the pore itself, it looks like this. And then let me just do with a couple of more pores in here, just so you see what I mean by network that I was mentioning before. So I have my pore in here, and my intensity I'm using around like 40, so that's 35, 36. And so I'm gonna just do like one pore right there. And again, like the fall off is gonna be very, you know, it's gonna go very far like that. And then you're gonna see when I try to detail, actually I'm gonna add a little bit deeper than that, so like 40. So I'm gonna go here. And then the next one, remember, like if I do something that's too perfect of a triangle like this, right? See, like there's a triangle that's perfect in there. And I keep doing this, always like trying to do like a perfect triangle or close to perfect. If I apply this to my model later on, it's gonna look fairly fake. You see, like I start seeing, like my eyes start identifying those lines. There's a straight line in here. There's a straight line in there, a straight line in here, there's a straight line in here, another one. So basically like your eye is going to start looking for patterns, you know, and they sure enough, they're going to find them. So that's the main thing I think to avoid doing is like, if you don't want to create something that looks very mechanical, is to actually do this with a certain difference in distance. So for example, if I have one here, you can add another one off center, right? This one, for example, like it's going to be off centered. You know, it's like create something that adds some variation in terms of, you know, the positioning of them. But the important thing is to actually keep the distance very coherent. So for example, like if I have this pore in here, you see the fall off goes all the way around there. So if I add another one here, those ones don't talk to each other, right? They're basically like they're too far apart. So they're very isolated in there. So if you create this little fall off in here with a little bit of those, you see like there's little bit of pillows in here, I sculpted, very subtle. I did that expecting to have the next pore a little bit closer. So they actually talk to each other, you know, it's like has a little bit of a structure in there that happens, right? So it's almost like this breaks up the next one and then it starts getting a little bit more cozy with each other. And, you know, so at the end, you can add a little bit more of a variation in scale for each one of those. And obviously try to prevent like, you know, the perfect triangles that I mentioned before. Some of them can be closer, some can be more distant from each other. But the important thing is that they have a little bit of a network going on. I can even add another one here, for example, you know. So at the end, we're gonna have something that has some structure in there, but it's not something that your eyes can lock and see like lots of perfect lines, you know. That's very important, I think. I don't think I emphasized enough like in the previous classes. I'm trying to do that because I'm seeing like more and more of the same mistakes, you know, and although I try to be clear, I mean, like, I know it's very difficult, you know, it's like for us as humans to prevent like patterns, you know, it's like, it seems like we feel more comfortable when we see a pattern and then we try to add that. But yeah, if you can keep that in mind, and then later on, once you have this in place, then you can do that little pass, you know, and have some of those extra patterns, like breaking up things a little bit further. And then obviously you have this, then they're gonna have like, you know, it's like little bumps and bruises and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, you can do a lot with pores, you know, it's like the important thing is like never leave them alone like that without adding something else to add more complexity to the whole system, you know. So let's see, like in terms of like building this little pore in here, let's see what you need to do actually. So let's just create one in here again. That's going to be as a single pore in here. The intensity I'm using like 40 something, 42. Let's try that. So I'm going to create one just as a reference like that. Let's turn on the double again, just for us to check that little upside down mountain like that, Mount Fuji, right? And then, so let's create another plane here. Let's bake this one to the side so you can have an idea. Let's draw maybe like from this angle around there. So Shift S, like Sam, just bakes in there. And then let's just Control Z. So to start a new one here, I mean, there are many ways you can do it. Let's try something here, for example, like if I use, let's click like a standard brush and I'm gonna clone it. So I'm gonna clone this one to create my own brush. And then I'm gonna add like a Z drag rectangle. And then an alpha, I can pick something here like the alpha 39, for example. So by default, if I just try to drag this, I'm gonna create like a funny, let's do it with the Z sub. I'm gonna create a funny little dot like that, right? Which is not like exactly what we want. So we can actually refine that curvature in the adjustments of your alpha. Let's make something a little bit more pointy like that. Right? So let's just reduce the intensity. Let's see how much we're gonna need. You can start with something like this, you know, it's like just in order for us to get like a bigger fall off, let's just reduce the intensity and just make a little bit bigger in here. We can make it even pointier than that. Let's see if everything is correct in there. Maybe my focal shift, I can actually bring it up. See if it's too much if I do it all the way up. It might be a little bit too much. Let's do focal shift a little bit, like 30 something. Yeah, so that's a good start right there. So let's just do a double. And then I can start sculpting. So let's do, this one has already a million polygons. So I'm gonna just smooth it out because it's a little squarish because of the resolution of the alpha itself. So I can start with something like this, it's like I could make it even bigger than that, but just for us to test here. So I can start by defining some of those lines. And again, I'm not gonna try to make them super well defined, like a too sharp. So I'm just gonna start by, adding some of them. I'm gonna go towards the center here. You can just like bring some of them. You can, kind of crook them, add a little bit more of direction sometimes. Smooth it out. I'm just gonna block some of them here just to see like the direction. Try to not to make like too perfect as well. Like, it's like if you have like two with a certain length, just to add another one with a little shorter, a much longer one on one side, or whatever you need to make things a little bit more asymmetrical, And then you can even break up some of them if you need to. So if I have something like this, just as a starting point, it's like very, very simple stuff. Then I can start like playing with my clay build up with the little alpha 35, right? It's just basically like to create this little, the little build up in between things. So let's do like a intensity 3. And even go lower in resolution just to sculpt it a little faster. So I can actually build like a soft spot. Important thing is to have those little soft areas around the whole thing, because those are the ones that are going to blend with the next pore when it gets closer to this one. It's like you're going to get those little areas. And then when you get right in the middle, you can start sculpting the famous butthole brush. So something like this, just starting like that, and then you start carving things a little bit deeper. So from here, I can actually do much deeper carving. And at the end, we can just like use a little bit of an inflate just to get things going. And it's still, oops, I'm still like in a very low res in here. I can actually increase the resolution and just get this break up a little bit further. And from time to time, you can actually break up some of those with tiny little lines going like in different directions. So I'm just gonna go a bit lower. So some of them just to incorporate some direction, some breakups, almost like tiny little scars in between. And then here, now that I have this guy, I can actually use a very low intensity, let's see how the fall off is there. So if something is not, the fall off is not perfect the way I want, I can manipulate this using like the move brush. For example, from different angles here, I can actually pull it, make sure that I make a little bit more like a pinch like that from the top. Just make sure it pinches a little bit better. And make sure that the fall off is like very long, Remember, it's not like something like this, right? We don't want this type of fall off. We want something that's very, very soft and long transition between things. So if you have something like this, now I can actually use an inflate. Oops. And the inflate has to be very, very subtle. So the intensity normally like at 2 or something like that. And you can just inflate right in the middle and even around here a little bit, just incorporate some of that. And now you see like it pinched pretty good right there. So it goes from this to something more like this. But then obviously make sure that you smooth things out from time to time and make sure that those lines don't look too sharp at the end, you know. And then now we can actually go and incorporate like the tiny stuff, you know, and go find some spots that need, you know, it's like some tinier detail if you need to, but don't overwork too much, you know. Some of this stuff is gonna be kind of like, it's gonna blend together with the rest when you have like the second pass on top of it and everything. But, you know, some stuff that just like add a little bit of more of an organic feel to it. Let's see, right there. I mean, like in principle, this whole thing is, it's very, very simple, you know, it's like there's no mystery, but the thing is like, it's a matter of like sculpting it so it basically talks to the next pore. Sometimes like one single one in isolation looks good. And then as soon as you put next to the other one, all of a sudden like it doesn't look that great anymore, you know. Another thing you can do is use your move brush to add some, you know, variation in the way that, let's go to the lower resolution a little bit. Kind of like, you know, it's like do some wiggles in here so it doesn't look like completely perfect and square. We can just use a little bit more like a, you know, a little bit more randomness to the direction of those little guys. But at this point here, I'm just gonna make sure I smooth this area out in here because I wanna make sure that blends back into the square. That just pops out just slightly like that, but then it goes back to completely flat. So let's go back in here. And now I have something like this, right? Which is not perfect. I would use that one probably as a reference more than this one. I can even smooth it out just a little bit. Let's see. In a lower res like that, just to relax that a little bit. And then let's say you're happy with it. In this case here, I think like I went like those little pillows are too big in here. They look much more pronounced than the one I had in there. But the falafel looks fairly okay, you know. So I think it should work for a pour in general. But obviously you could do a much better job than that. You know, so I can do something better than that as well, something more organic looking. But for let's pretend we are super happy with this, which I'm not, but you know, we did it fast. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna zoom in, I'm gonna turn off perspective first. So perspective off. I'm gonna make it square, basically like use shift, right? Click, drag to rotate, and then click shift to just lock it. And then now it's flat against this. I'm gonna try to maximize it to my screen like that. So now I have it around there. So there are a bunch of different ways you can create this pour in here. In the past, we were discussing, you know, there are, you know, it's like you can, for example, like get the alpha here and just say like a grab document, right? You should get like the alpha and everything. But I tried to use the old school way, which is like using one of those tools, which is like a 2.5D tool instead of like a 3D tool. So basically what I do, I get this tool and then click in this guy here, which is called MRGBZ grabber. So when you click on it, it's going to tell you, do you want to switch to the 2.5D, right? Basically, that's what it's asking you. So you're just going to say like switch. And now you're basically like, this is not a 3D model. It's just baked in there. And then this MRGBZ grabber, the way it works, you have to start from the center. So I have to kind of like, I don't know exactly where the center of this whole thing is. I can only guess. So I'm going to try it from here. I'm going to click and then I'm going to click shift. So that creates a perfect square, you see? And then I can go as far as I want. So basically I want to make sure I cover this whole area around these little pillows around, which I can add a little fall off as well. So that should be fine. So something around here, for example. Then once I'm happy, I'm going to just release the mouse button. And now it captured for me a texture, which I don't need. So I can texture off. And this is basically what I need right here, the alpha, right? So now let's actually clear up this one, Control N. So I cleared it up. And now I'm going to drag and basically create another plane here. Plane 3D, make polymesh 3D. I'm going to draw it, right? And then I'm going to actually subdivide a couple of times. Again, we have the medium polygons. And then now I'm going to go to my standard brush. I'm going to create a clone just so it can start fresh. And then under alpha here, I can pick the one I just created. And then under stroke, I can create, grab the drag rectangle. So if I draw this thing now, it's gonna look funky. Around it, it's gonna look very funky because of this. Let me show you. So if I click it, you see it kind of goes forward, so it creates this bump. So basically like it's a swollen butthole. Yeah, so that's not what we want here, right? So we're gonna have to find out what's going on in there. So the first thing we're gonna try is like, gonna use like the right click and then the focal shifting here. If you go all the way to -100, now it's gonna look worse. Check this out. It's gonna look worse, but at least we know what's the distance that we need to go to be able to make this flush with the rest of the skin. So let's do this. We're gonna go to alpha. And there's this mid value in here. You're gonna see things gonna change a little bit. So the best way for me to do it, if I do a radial fade of 10, see what happened in there? So it's like white and then it goes black, right? So if I start playing with this mid value here, it's gonna start seeing like that black value is gonna go lighter and lighter. And the objective here is to get to something really, really close to what you have around. So probably around like 96 or even higher. So if I do something like this now, oh, dude, I nail with 96. It's kind of rare. You're gonna see the other classes, sometimes it's 98, sometimes it's something else. There's a tiny little bit of a line in here, but very, very, I think that's it. If I do, for example, like, let's see, a 97. Let's see what happens. You're gonna see a tiny little line. No, it's actually pretty decent. Oh, no. Okay, yeah, it's because I'm using the radial fade, obviously. Okay, let's see. So yeah, now I'm seeing the line, right? So that line shows me that a little bit deeper than it should be. I can use like, try to nail that. Let's try 95. 95 is still a little deep. I still see a little mark. So I'm gonna go maybe 93. There is a button in there that tries to estimate things, but it doesn't work that great. So this one passed, so now it's in relief. So I probably 94 is the sweet spot. If it's not perfect, yeah, 94 is quite really close to perfect. So in that case, I can just use a little radial fade now, just to eliminate those little lines. So I can use like maybe 3 for radial fade. And now that's pretty decent. Maybe it's still, I'm still seeing a little bit of it. Let me try to add this maybe like 8. Yeah, that's pretty good. So basically that's what we needed in there. Now in terms of the fall off from the side, the mountain looks a little bit deep in here, right? It looks a little bit tall. So that means my intensity is too high. So let's try at 43, something like that. That's better. And the fall off in this is much better as well. So like upside down, little mountain there, right? That looks like a nice little profile. So at this point here, we have our pour. We can actually just brush and then save as our first brush in there. Obviously, you can keep tweaking it until you get something cool. This is just our first test here. So for example, like the best way to try it is to draw one of them and then start doing that exercise I did before, like do a bunch of them close to each other. And I can tell that they don't have the same quality as the first one that I have in there in place. They might work fine, you know, it's like in combination with other stuff. But the important thing is that they do have enough fall off between each other to create this pillowy structure under, you know, it's like in between them. Instead of like I said before, like this isolated thing that in the middle, there's nothing in there. You need to see them actually interacting with each other. You know, it's like kind of like flexing the surface and bending over in there. And then make sure that you have like, again, like a variation for the position of them. Make sure that things are not in perfect triangles, right? So if I have one there, like that, maybe a little bigger around there. The scale variation, there's a little wiggle room, but not too much, you know. You try to not make things like too tiny, for example, from this to this, right? That's not gonna work. Like you see, like it's smaller, but still like within that context, it works, you know. And then the important thing is that with that fall off that we created, basically like it starts like you see, like it fades from one into the other one, and you can see there's this pillowy surface that's created between them. That's what's important to do, you know. And then obviously, once you have those guys in place, now we're going to go for the second step, which is basically like you're going to create an array of them. So for example, if, I'm doing everything very fast in here, right? Like creating the pour was already very fast. So you're probably going to be able to do something much better than this, but this is just as an example. So do more carefully than what I'm doing. So you're going to create something like this. Again, like some variation between them, but within like making some sense, you know? And the important thing is like this fall off has to be enough to read as something soft in between. So if I have something like that now, let's make a little bit bigger. I want to create, like the intention here is to create an array. And again, do it more carefully because you want to make sure that things look very cohesive.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Have you ever used the drag dot with like a twist?
No, I never tried.
Instead of drag rectangular?
No.
I find it a lot faster, but I guess the only issue with it is the size variance.
Oh,
Because with the drag rectangular, you could obviously adjust it on the fly, but there's no setting with the drag dot to adjust a slight variance in size. So it's not so like procedural.
Yeah, this one is kind of like I get used to every time I apply one, I do the rotation and the scale like on the fly, like you said, and I try to keep things with more variation that way. But yeah, if you find another way, I'm totally cool with it. You know, I'm just I'm kind of used to this way, but I'm pretty sure there are many other ways to do it, especially with ZBrush. I mean, like, there's always like 100 solutions for the same problem in ZBrush, which is really cool. I like how open it is in that way. So now let's say like if you're happy with it, which I'm not again, right? But again, we are happy for the purpose here. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna click again to my drag MRGBZ grabber switch. And then again, I'm gonna find like an imaginary center in here. And then I'm gonna click drag and then shift to make a square. And then I got that one. So now basically turn that off. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna do a Control N to clear up. I'm gonna create my other plane. Make Polymesh 3D. I'm gonna subdivide, Control D, up to 1,000,000. And
sorry,
now,
Chris.
yes.
What resolution are those saving at?
The resolution?
Yeah,
Oh,
the grab dot.
I'm not sure. Let's take a look. Let's see. It all depends on the resolution you have for your screen, right? In my case here, I'm getting like 700 by 600, something like that. Yeah, that's basically what's doing in there. This one's 758 by 739. Yeah.
All right, cool, thanks.
But if you have like a higher resolution, I mean, like I have to teach the classes with my basically like capturing my tablet because that's where I work. And that's an old HD 22 Wacom, and it only supports 1080p, you know? So it's kind of sucky because I'm stuck like, always when I try to show you guys the windows and everything in Maya, everything is kind of like compressed and small, you know, actually too big for the screen, but it is what it is. And then, so I'm gonna switch to my depth grab, basically the same principle, right? It's gonna do the same thing. So if I try to draw it, you're gonna see something weird at first, right? It's too deep. So the first thing is the depth of it, right? So I'm gonna go back to my, let's see, around 22. Maybe it can be a little bit deeper than that. Let's try 26. Yeah, the pores themselves look okay, but now we have this big step. So the big step we're gonna fix with that thing, with the mid value. It's gonna start with that value that we found first, 94. Let's see what happens here. Control Z. 94, really close. Maybe could try maybe like a 93, just in case. Sometimes it nails on the dot, but we can always use the radial fade. Yeah, it's still a little high. Let's try 92. It's always over 90 for sure. Interesting. Oh, I think I'm going the opposite way. I don't know. I think I have to go, what, 96? Oh yeah, okay, 96 it is. And then I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna add a little radial fade, just tweak a little bit of the outside stuff. And now I'm gonna have this brush here that's gonna look like this. And then the principle is the same. Basically, like when I apply this brush, I'm gonna show you now this how it works in practice, okay? And with the old lady here. So basically, like I have my face now, and let's just pretend you already saved your first brush that you created, and you create an array, and then you saved your second brush. In my case, I have for my first brush, this one here, which looks like this, right? That one I did the drawing on the plane. And then the array based on that one looks like this. Let's see. Multi-pores, this guy. It's like I have a bunch more than what I did there. So I made like a big chunk of them, right? Some variation in between. You see like there's some different in distances in there. It's almost like you can see some lines, but it's not very evident, right? Like it's almost like a zigzag. And that's how I want you guys to do it. Kind of like a pattern that looks a little bit weird, you know, that doesn't have like a perfect structure. So, or perfect order. So it doesn't look mechanical. So the way we're gonna work with this is like this. First, we're gonna have to find out what's the scale, right? If for the scale, there is no formula I can give you, you know, because we all gonna sculpt our pores differently. And the other thing is that the observation part, right? We're gonna have to exercise that. So for example, if I go to Karen in here, our model, and you start looking to an area like this, right? We have to try to match a similar amount of pores in there for that area. So for example, if I move her to the side in here, let's see, let's keep her partially visible in here. Let's see, right there. Let's get this around, maybe around here. And let's move this around there. So if you have something like that, we're gonna have to try to match that as, you know, the best we can, because what happens is that if you do something like this, right, that's not what I'm seeing there. If I do something like this, it's not what I'm seeing there either, right? Like it looks like it's something in between. It has to be smaller than that. So I'm just trying to capture the scale of the density of those pores in there at this point, right? So like I said before, you can actually count them and make sure that you nail it perfectly, right? But I would say like, if it's something like this for this area, it's something that to me looks believable, you know? Obviously there's a lot of blending and all this stuff you're gonna have to do. Some of them are larger than the other ones. We're gonna use some brushes to help with that as well. But I would say like a scale to start with, you know? It's something that makes sense when you look at the picture like that. And then obviously it's gonna make sense just for this area, right? You're gonna start like you have something like that. They're very distinct in here, but then they start getting a little bit more stretched when they start connecting to the lips in here. We're gonna have to basically work on all those areas of blending, right? Then you're gonna get them pretty much like more visible around there again, right? So if you're sculpting around there and you realize that looking at the reference, right? Like don't ask me if the scale is bigger or smaller, right? Just look at the reference and you have to be able to judge if they're too big or too small by looking at that. And then if you have the scale around there, the scale around here probably is going to be similar. There is something that happens, for example, like in the muzzle, right? Like you have like the teeth underneath. In her case here, probably like she doesn't have a lot of teeth anymore, but she still has this volume here caused by the bone structure underneath. And the same happens with the chin as well, right? So there's this bulge that's happening in those areas. And although we don't have any bones in here, you have all this mass of you know, skin and fat in this area. So you're still gonna get a lot of stretching. So basically like this area in relation to this area, in relation to this area, you should have a similar scale for those pores. And then maybe in some other areas where there's not a lot of stretching going on, they're probably gonna get a little bit smaller and concentrate a little bit more. And imagine like an orange peel that's elastic, right? Like you're kind of like covering the whole thing. So around here, you're probably gonna have to find out what's the scale between that and that. So basically like what I do, if I create like if I stamp this around here and I kind of like have an idea about the size of the stamp, the reference I use is like this. So I make my brush size to be roughly in the same the same size of that brush that I just added, right? So you see like the red circle around it is fairly in a similar size. So instead, at this point, try not to zoom in or out, right? So you can actually keep that as a reference. And then if you add that, for example, around here, now you have like a similar reference for you for the similar size for your brush, right? When you go to the next one now, when you start like blending those guys, actually trying to cover a larger area, what I do is like this. So I go from here, I barely touch that area that was just sculpted with another one, another circle right here. And I'm gonna drag all the way until it touches it around there. So it's a very similar size, I can tell, right there. And then I'm gonna keep doing this for areas that I need more stuff. For example, around here, gonna be the same thing. I'm gonna draw it and then try to reach that limit in there. And then basically like, now I have like similar scale for everything, right? Now, the in-between stuff, you're basically gonna switch back to your single pour that you created. That's why you have a single and then the multiple. And then you're gonna try to find out the first thing, what's the right depth for them to look, you know, similar. So for example, around here, depth in there, looks like something that is gonna work. So I can keep going with it. And basically like what I'm gonna do at this point here, I'm gonna just like put on my, you know, not now obviously, but later when you guys are not looking, just put my headphones, put some nice music. I'm gonna put some Opeth, and then keep cranking on it. You know, it's like in about a couple of hours, you're gonna have a huge chunk of stuff already covered. You know, so so that way, I'm basically gonna cover entire areas like this, just like drawing those circles with the array. Make sure that when you build the array, you build in a very circular way, right? So we can actually use that technique. Obviously, you can always spin things around. So when I'm drawing those pores, I never do like the same direction. So for example, I go from left to right, right to left, up to down, down to low. You know, it's like whatever it is to be able to actually create a little bit more variation in the rotation of those little pores. And then obviously when I draw, try to do like with a little bit of variation for the scale and in the positioning as well, right? So basically like that's the gist of just adding the pores, the basic part of it, right? So I'm, like I said before, I'm not gonna cover the entire face like I was doing before because it causes a lot of confusion. Sometimes people just like forget that there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. And then they post stuff like everything looks the same and kind of like, oh, okay. I hope they remember to actually add more variation and then make those areas more distinct from each other. But for the most part, people forget. And then all the way to the final piece, you know, it's just like the same pour everywhere. And then it really doesn't sell it, you know. So I want to make sure you guys get this because it's very important. You know, it's like you need to be able to create like variations in skin, you know, different parts of the face. You have different types of skin, you know, it's like, or if not different types of skin, at least like the different quality of it, you know, it's there's a lot going on. For example, like, let me just go back to this one here. And I try to undo all the way to that first guy in there. HD is a little heavy when it comes to undos, because obviously it's trying to undo from a very, very high res model. So you see like at this point here, I have that stretch happening there, right? So stuff like that, if you want to prevent something like this from happening, what you can do before you start your HD, this is one thing that I didn't realize until like a couple, not a couple, but like months ago. I think it was the second class that we had, or third, that you can actually create morph targets within the HD, right? The thing about the morph target within the HD is that they are temporary. So if you create a morph target in here, what happens is that later on, if you get out of HD and come back to this HD, it's going to be a different session, and then the morph target is not going to work. But at this point here, for example, if you create a stored morph target in here before you start doing any detail, so what happens is this. So remember what I did in there? I went there and I put like my, oops, not this guy. Let's go back to the other array. Let's import this one. And then let's say you want to do like a little scale in here. That looks kind of like this, right? And then I got that area that has a ton of trouble in there, right? I could disguise this. I could do a lot of stuff. For example, like there is a brush in here. If you don't know, if you use the shift brush, sometimes even at 100%, it doesn't completely eliminate things. It still keeps an area, you know, it's like a little echo in there. But there is a brush in here that you can use that's under Lightbox. If you go to, let's see, to brushes, so brush. If you go to the smooth area, this one, there is one that's called Smooth Stronger. I'm gonna click OK. So this one now, every time I access smooth, it's a much stronger one, you know. This one actually eliminates a lot of stuff. So obviously, it's still gonna remain a tiny bit of things in there, but even at the highest resolution here at 32 million polygons, it still smooths pretty good. So this is one way of doing it. And the other one is now that we have our morph target already saved, you can go to your Z, actually morph, sorry, morph. So let's go to, oops, morph. Where is it? Right here. So now with the morph brush, what you can do is just like go right there. And you can just blend back to whatever is the morph target you saved, right? So that way you can keep that one, you know, alive. Every time you go to HD, for example, you just create a new, get used to creating a new morph target, because this later on is going to be very, very useful when you have to blend stuff, you know. When you start blending, for example, from pores to wrinkles around this area, you're going to have lots of tiny little wrinkles you're going to be sculpting in the next couple of days. I'm going to sculpt all this stuff live in front of you. And then you're going to see how I'm going to be blending it. So the morph, you can actually reduce the intensity of it, something like smaller like that. And you can just go, for example, like even slower, lower than this. Let's try maybe like 3. So you can do this, for example, and very carefully just blend things back. And then from this point on, you can start sculpting the wrinkles, and everything blends perfectly, you know. And then if you're not happy with anything, just crank the intensity and just like blend everything back to your neutral model, you know. So obviously you're not going to be able to do this if you get out of the session and comes back to HD later. But at least at this point here for this specific session, you know, for example, like if you're doing the pores, you already finished the pores for the cheeks in here. And then now it's time to actually detail this whole eye bag area. You know that, you know, it's a good opportunity before you start doing this to save a morph target so you can actually have access to that so you can blend those things together, you know. In terms of let's just go. One thing I forgot to mention is like, even when you're in HD, you still have access to the other subdivision levels all the way down to the subdivision level after the regular subdivisions, right? So for example, like remember my highest at the subdivision level before HD was 1.1 million polygons, right? So I'm gonna go Shift D to go back in here. You're gonna see 32 is what I have right now. I'm gonna go to 8 and then to 2.2 and then 500. So 500 is because obviously my model in here is partially visible, right? I clicked on solo in here, right? So basically like all the detail that's in HD is only 500,000 polygons out of 1.1 million, right? So I can go back to that specific area. So I go back to solo in here. Now I have access to 500,000 polys. And at 500,000 polys here is pretty cool because a lot of stuff that I can do in HD, for example, it's a good example here I can use. For example, if I'm sculpting my pores in HD, right, at the highest level, so it's gonna be like level at 32 million polygons. So I have my little pores in there. They sculpted that like super tiny, right? And I see like, I can see everything. They have nice resolution, right? But then let's say, for example, I want a more like faint version of them. For example, for the pores of the nose, I can actually go back a couple of resolutions, like maybe 2. So I'm at 2 million polygons now. And now I can sculpt some of those guys around here, for example. Actually, let's do it intensity a little bit lower than that, so 30. So I can do this, for example, like this, because those ones are more spread out than the other ones, right? And they need less detail. So they are a little bit more like, it's almost like a faded version of the other ones we made. So at this resolution here, if I sculpt them, if I go up, they're gonna look like softer versions of the first one we sculpted. So there's a difference now between those ones and those ones, right? So we can actually find what's the sweet spot, how many subdivision levels lower you have to do in order to accomplish something that it's not as, as sharp like that. Obviously, if you use like this smooth stronger, you can actually use like something like this and actually do this a similar thing just with the smooth itself, right? But this is it's a cool way to just like show that you can still work on all those different techniques, it's like for detailing. So let's go back to my morph in here. And now that's saved in there, I know I can just get rid of this stuff at any time. And then I can start sculpting something for real here. So because I need to get some stuff done, right? So let's try my multi-pores. And I'm gonna start with the cheeks. So the cheeks, I'm gonna have to find a reference, probably gonna be the other lady I had before, which was this lady here. And let's see, I don't think she has a ton of her cheeks, but she does have them in there. Yeah, she does, yeah. It's just like, there's a lot of depth of field in this this picture, which is not very common for this photographer, but this one, he has a ton, so we're not seeing a lot of it. Now, what I said before is true. I mean, like for this old lady here, maybe a lot of pores in this area is not gonna work for her because maybe it's gonna be a contradiction, between her skin being very old and then having all this texture in it, which is supposed to go away as you get much older. But we're gonna try something that, should work for the most part. So let's try, I don't remember what was the intensity. I think I had it before. I think that's too much. Let's get around, what, 20? Yeah, 20 is still too deep. I'm gonna get maybe a little bit less than that. 16. Oops. Let's try that. Yeah, that's softer. Yeah, that should work. And then obviously I can blend things in, Now I'm gonna have to blur my eyes a little bit to be able to kind of count those pores. Otherwise there's a lot going on in there. So I'm gonna try to blur my eyes a little bit just to count them visually in here. Something like that should work. And then they're probably gonna get between this distance in here and this one, I can tell this one, they have more density a little bit. Because of that, I was talking about, it's like around here, there's a little bit more bulge. So the skin is actually stretching further, right? And then as soon as you get an area that is not bulging that much, you're probably gonna get a little bit more density. But I mean, it's something that we're gonna have to be doing as we go. So around that area now, I can either, for example, like use the morph to just get rid of it. Make sure that everything is clean. Or I can just keep sculpting and just like patch it, it's like with the single pores later. So let's go back in here to my multi-pores. And I'm gonna do probably like something similar around here. Let's see if I can do from an angle like that. If I can, I'm gonna have to actually do this manually with the little single pores. I think I'm gonna do that actually. And then just gonna do this area here to kind of like have a little bit more density. So they're a little bit smaller, kind of like similar to that. And then the in between here, I can actually add some by hand. So I'm gonna be doing this, and you see like I have symmetry turned on for that reason, right? A lot of the stuff I have in here, like those secondary lines and everything, I'm gonna have to eliminate a lot of them. And then try to blend things in a way that it looks less symmetrical. Eventually all this stuff I actually added too much for what I need for this lady, but eventually I'm gonna start like breaking up things and adding more asymmetry to them, so I'm not too worried about it. But if you want to start like someone older, maybe a little bit less detail would be helpful, In my case, I just need to get stuff started, because I'm kind of like, I always feel like I'm falling behind something. I know I'm not, but it's just because we have just 1 month to finish the model, And then I feel pressure to, because I want to make sure that I go all the way through with the model. Obviously, it's not going to be finished at the end. Never is. But at least I want to have something that's, close enough to finished. So I can actually show. So let's see if when I get to an area like this, starts getting a little bit more, more tricky. So I'm going to just try to start from here. And I can actually incorporate that to the corner completely and see what I need to blend back. So for example, that whole area, I can use a morph to just blend that back. And even in the lips in here, I can actually go and start, for example, one from here. Maybe that one's a little bit too close. Let's see if I can do it from here. It's gonna be a little hard. Yeah, it's gonna start stretching, which can be a cool thing. Yeah, the kind of like accidental stretching there. But if there's no way, I'm gonna have to actually sculpt by hand a lot of those little guys in there, which I'm trying to prevent. I think I can just like, maybe if I can overlap a little bit, but I really don't like overlapping them. Should be okay. I'm gonna have a bunch of wrinkles in there. Should be covering up a lot. So now I can go back to my morph and just like blend back this whole area here. So I can deal with that. And then let's get to an area like, for example, like this corner in here. You see the way that her wrinkles break up in here? We tend to normally sculpt those wrinkles as the very straight lines. And sometimes you get them straight with some pinching, but it's never like a complete perfect straight line, right? They kind of like go in the wobble a little bit. And it's normally like it's those pores trying to connect to each other. You know, it's like a path of least resistance, right? Based like the kind of like the skin is very soft. So it tries to break up in between those pores and create those wrinkles. So let's try, let's just do a little morphing here first. Let's blend this. Why didn't it? I thought I blended both sides at the same time. Probably I didn't. So let's try to do some like that, for example, like that type of wrinkle. So the way I'm gonna approach here, I'm gonna build some of them like by hand. Let's go to my single pore. So let's start like adding some pores right. Oops, I just pulled one in there. Right around here. So I'm gonna continue that little network in there. So let's go there. Very tricky little area to sculpt. But once that's done, we can start moving around. So around here too, there's a little bit of stretch in there, but not bad. I'm gonna be adding some other stuff that's gonna help to mix that. Just gonna do some of that. And then, like I said, this is a kind of boring thing, you know, it's like, I really don't want you guys to think that this is the, you know, it's like, that's the way to do it. That's my own crazy way of doing it, you know. I think it's useful when you learn doing it, because if you want to do like creature stuff, or if you get like a dirty scan that you don't have, like you need to patch it, you can actually do some work, like manual work to be able to accomplish that, you know. And I think it's just cool because, you know, instead of like using like ready-made stuff, when you create one pore yourself, instead of like, you know, downloading from some website or even like getting from me, if it's a pore that you created yourself, it's part of the, you know, it's like the work you're doing. But it's like everything you were trying to do like by hand and trying to nail likeness and all this stuff without any blueprints or whatever it is. I think it's just like a cool way of having your own pore, you know, something you built that nobody else has the same, you know. It's like each one of you guys is going to build a different pore. And then at the end, we're going to try to make it work and look realistic, you know. But it's pretty cool, you know. It's like, I think it's kind of like a romantic idea, I suppose. But it's cool that we all have like different approaches for the same problem, you know. So let's see. So at this point here, I got a bunch of them in place. And then let's just break up a little bit further in here. And after you get the whole of it, you know, it's like it goes fairly fast. I mean, like if you're gonna detail the entire face with like single pores like that, instead of using an array, it should take about like, I would say 8 hours or so of work. If you're using the arrays, you should reduce this a lot by like maybe like 2 hours or so. And then obviously there's a lot of, this would be just like the first pass of it. And then everything else would have to be like, you know, it's like variations of it. And I want to do like this first pass in here to be able to show you guys any type of variation from this point on, which is like the directional stuff that I mentioned, the, you know, those wrinkles that we have to build, like starting from those pores. by trying to connect the dots. Basically, like you're going to connect some of those pores with each other using some wrinkles. Getting a little bit small in there, so we're going to have to grow a little bit. So more towards this bulgy area of the cheeks, I get a little bit more spread out. And then as I get a little bit more where the areas are compressed, you're going to get them a little bit smaller, a little bit more compressed. Try to imagine like a elastic kind of thing. Although for an old lady, she shouldn't have like a very elastic skin anymore, right? That's why we kind of like, at this point here, just studying and seeing what works for her. But eventually, for her age, I'm probably going to have to remove a lot of what I'm doing now. But I still have to do it to be able to show you guys. So I'm glad to do it. And then, so for example, like if I have something that looks like this now, right? Let's see if we need anything else. Let's see, maybe one around there, another one around here. And here, and then we should get both sides, right? It's fairly good. So now we're going to start playing with some wrinkles, right? Like obviously the wrinkles later on, we're going to just do some generic ones first, and those ones we can do like symmetrically. But everything that's like main wrinkles and everything, like landmarks of the face, that it's kind of like a no-no to do like symmetrically, because your eye can catch straight away. The same way we're trying to avoid the lines when it comes to the pores, we're trying to avoid like a very perfectly mirrored stuff, you know. So for my go-to brush is that one I show you guys many times, like the Alpha 39 with the little alpha tweak to make it sharper like that. And then using a lazy mouse, right? Although I'd rather not use lazy mouse right now, because the lazy mouse has the problem that sometimes it shoots across the model and creates a straight line, and that can be very annoying. And so in this case, I'm gonna just turn the stroke like the lazy mouse off. And let's see what I have for this guy here. Let's see. Yeah, the carve is fairly decent. Let's see, a little bigger. Yeah, something like that. So I'm gonna be doing a little bit smaller in this so I can actually have a sharper point, something like that. And then I'm gonna be playing this game of connecting the dots in here, which is like, if I get a bunch of pores in there, instead of like making a straight line like that, right? That makes no sense. Actually, let me make it a little bit stronger. A line like that, right? Instead of that, I can actually do a little bit better by just like picking some of those guys and connecting them. So like you're gonna go from this one to this one, and then that one to this one. And then you're gonna start connecting those guys and creating a line that's more interesting, you know. You can break up like towards the other side, for example, not only the same size side every time, but like, you know, from time to time just breaks up. Sometimes it breaks up like to the side like that, and it breaks the whole structure, you know, kind of like branches out. But then the main one actually creates this deeper line. And then eventually you're gonna have something that going to start looking a little bit more interesting, you know. So from this one, for example, I can start branching out to that one. And remember the direction I was mentioning before. If I want to create something that looks a little bit more directional, normally what I do is just go over those little pores and I just like draw a little line over them like that. And I start pulling and creating this direction, you know. And then from time to time, I create those lines a little bit longer so they connect like more pores. Sometimes they're just like one single one, just like to stretch them. So all this stuff here has to be done over the entire surface, you know. It's like every single part of the model has to, you have to treat them as you would, for example, like to represent like a different type of skin. For example, like around this area here, once I have the pores in place, probably gonna be doing this tomorrow with you guys. I'm gonna have the pores in place, and then we're gonna have a lot of stretching. There's a bunch of lines that happen in here, for example, like there's stretching happening that way. Oh, my brush is a little funky here because not a lot of steps, but I'm gonna have lines going this way, and you're gonna have lines going this way as well. So we're gonna try to represent that in the context of, you know, with the pores. So we're gonna add some of those directional lines. So the way you're gonna do this, it's gonna be a combination of manually sculpting, which we're gonna be doing tomorrow, And then, and also this little brush that I show you guys, one of the first ones, the skin random one, this one. So for example, like in areas like this, I can definitely use some of that to do like, to incorporate some direction, for example. See, like those tiny little lines I just added, they just incorporate something more interesting, you know, especially when you go towards the lips. And they have to be strong just enough to kind of like add this direction, but without actually obliterating the pores themselves, because if it's too strong like that, look what happens, right? Then it dominates the whole thing. You still have to see the pores as being the dominant ones. Those ones are here just to add texture to the pores themselves, right? So all this stuff we're gonna be doing, for example, gonna happen around the mouth. So you're gonna be adding some direction around here, flaring out from here out. And this is gonna be all in combination with the pores, right? Same thing with those guys. We're gonna get more and more of them coming towards the center, like that. So it kind of flares that way. And then at the end, for certain areas that we don't need a lot of stuff going on, you can use the same brush, you know, just with a little circular motion that I mentioned before, maybe a little lower resolution, lower intensity, just to break up the surface like that. And then the pores, we can start blending, for example, let me get the single pore here again. And then instead of like the intensity of 31 that I was using there, maybe I can use a little bit lower than that and just blend this back to this area. And then in here, instead of like using the same distance I'm using here, I can start spreading them out a little bit more. It's almost like you have to understand there's a transition between two different types of skin in here, right? And then you can basically create this impression of a transition between them by just like spreading them out a little bit, making a little bit more vague in there, right? And that's gonna happen all around the nose. So the nose, you're gonna start with some of them, and then you're gonna start getting a little bit more of a blend. And then obviously we always have our trusty morph target that's saved in there, just in case if I wanna blend anything a little bit better, you know, for example, like here already there's a mess in there. So I'm just gonna use that to clear it up. And you can actually use like a smaller intensity as well, right? Something like that, just make sure that the blend is quite perfect. And yeah, you can use all those different techniques together. And then for the lips, there's a day I think we're gonna be sculpting the lips, and then the other day is gonna be like the eye bags and showing all those blending techniques. Probably like tomorrow, I can show you like this chin area and also start maybe like with the bags. But I'm gonna try to go with the pores. Probably gonna cover this area around here with the pores today. Probably around here and the chin. And if I have time, I'm gonna start doing some in the forehead. The thing in the forehead is that I have a facial expression that's very strong. So I have to smooth out this whole thing here first. Can go resolution a little bit lower. It's not following the topology perfectly, so getting a little bit stepping in there. But yeah, go here to smooth it out. So I'm gonna try to do that. And it's basically like what I try to do in those classes is that I try to do stuff that I already show you guys during the class. It's basically like a repetition of whatever I'm doing here. I try not to do anything new. And if I do something new by any chance, I'm gonna probably like first thing tomorrow is to actually recap and say, oh, see, like this thing I did yesterday, that's how I approach it. And I'm gonna repeat the steps so you guys are aware of it. The intention is to always like keep you guys in the loop of whatever I'm doing, you know. So now that we have the model in here, I'm gonna get out of HD just to show you guys how it works. So basically, like to get out, you just press A. And remember, from this point on, that morph target doesn't work anymore, right? Just for that specific session. So now I have the pores in there, and now my model is back to 1.1 million. So, you know, it's like it looks very funky in there, right? So now to see a preview, press A outside of the model again. So you don't need to enter HD if you just want a preview. And that's gonna show, basically, that's my HD geometry right there, right? One thing I'm gonna tell you guys, try to avoid smoothing things in here, you know, at this resolution. If you want to smooth something, maybe like you can go a couple of resolutions lower in smooth things if it's like bigger forms. But if you smooth like things at the highest level of your known HD, this affects the way the HD looks. Sometimes it breaks things a little bit, you know. So if you want to smooth something, maybe go to a one subdivision level less and then you smooth it. Otherwise, you might, you know, affect whatever is done in the other one. So the last thing we're going to do today is basically like, let's go through the settings for exporting those maps. So now what I have in here is a model that has already all the UVs in place, right? Just to make sure we have the UVs in place, let me just get the model I have in Maya, because those ones I'm pretty sure I have the UVs. So just going to delete the morph target. Let me just go back to Maya here. So this lady here, she has, oh, this one is the high resolution one. Let's see. Modeling, UV. Oh, it's rendering in the background. Yeah, I started to render in there. I was like, no, stop. There you go. So let's go. Window modeling and then UV. So that's basically what I have in here. What I did with the lady in Maya before, yeah, I think I have the latest. But I did some relaxation, you know. It's like I kind of like did another how you call, like you unfold, right, to be able to relax those areas a little bit more. But which, by the way, with this this computer, this new computer, there is a bug with the thread rippers that you know, affects the unfold. You have to do very, you know, carefully, and it's tiny little chunks using the brush instead of like doing it overall. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And it's something that it used the same algorithm of some other software someone mentioned to me the other day, which is just for UVs. And it's basically like it wasn't planned for using with this type of chip. They didn't have those chips back in the day. And there is some instruction in there in the code that just breaks it. So just keep that in mind. You know, if you're using thread rippers, you're probably going to have trouble with unfold 3D things. If you use the old algorithm, the traditional one from Maya, it should be just fine to unfold. But if you switch to the unfold 3D, anything out there that uses unfold 3D algorithms is probably going to break if you try to use the thread ripper. And by the way, the computer was very, not very, but was kind of unstable last week, if you remember. I even posted on Facebook. And then someone told me like to just make sure that I was using a profile for my memories that matches my memories. And I used it, and it stopped like crashing straight away, you know. And I also removed any type of overclocking that I was having, because I was trying to do like a safe overclock, and even that was kind of breaking things a little bit. So I think it was a combination of the memory speed and then the overclocking, and I removed them, and the computer is solid for about a week now. You know, it's like no crashes whatsoever, pretty solid. So yay. So let's look at the exporting things here. So I have my let's just double check how my UVs look like. Basically, like when you go to your morph, to the UV map, and you click morph UV, what happens is that it doesn't recognize you dim, so it's going to overlap everything. But at least I can see that everything is in place. You know, it's like all the parts are in place in there. So I like this bump function here. It's pretty cool. Let's see, morph back. Yeah, they have like this bump function. If you keep at 0 now, it goes flat like this, right? But then you can actually add that little bump. That's pretty cool. This is something that was kind of new, I think, they added later. So now if I do the morph again, it creates a little bump, so it shows you relief like that. So that's cool. Okay, so I know I have all my maps in place. So all I have to do now is like, you have to pay close attention to the steps, okay? It sounds pretty stupid, but it actually works very well. And I explain to you tomorrow why I have to do this way. But basically, like once you go, you have your model, you have all your HD geometry in place, right? And you cannot see here, but you can preview. So go to your lowest resolution, and you're gonna, first thing, you're gonna store. Actually, let's not do this just now. Let's just export this mesh first, the lowest resolution. Even better, let's go, instead of the lowest, let's go to one subdivision higher than that, which in my case, like a subdivision level. So this is 1, right? So this one is 2. So we're gonna export this one first, and then I'm gonna call it old lady. I'm gonna call it MR for mid resolution, and I can keep, can be like MR1. And then I'm gonna go to the lowest and I'm gonna export it again as AMR, actually LR, so low resolution 1. So I'm gonna iterate on that. So every time I save it, it's gonna be a different number, but basically the same naming. And then now I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna delete morph target if I have anything stored. And then I'm gonna click, follow those 3 steps, is store, switch, and then import. It sounds stupid because I'm importing exactly the same model, the low resolution version. But ZBrush needs that model in there to compare with itself actually as a buffer when you use the switch morph target during the export. So it makes total sense in when I asked Ofer, it made total sense for himself explained to me, but to me it never made sense. But the fact is it works, so that's all that matters to me. So I'm gonna go to your multi-map exporter under the Z plugin, and I have clicked the displacement. So the first thing I'm gonna use here is the 8K. You guys feel free to, if you have more UDIMs, you can use 4Ks like I mentioned before. But in my case, I have just a few UDIMs, so I need to go a little higher to be able to represent all the HD stuff. So I have like 892, which is the maximum here, 8K. And then let's explore the options in here. So export options. First one, you're gonna notice I have switch morph target on, which has to be on to compare it to create that effect that we want. And then file names, make sure you have this one set as well. What's different for you guys if you never did this, this is probably gonna look like this by default, which is like the Maya format for, ZBrush Maya. And then you're gonna click on it until you switch to UDIM. So this needs to be done. This one is off by default, you can click on or not. It's just like for overriding files if they seem the same. And then that's basically what you need is just a UDIM in here, right? I'm gonna go back around here, and then you already check the file names. You already clicked the switch morph target, and then you're gonna click displacement map, and those are the settings I use. I use adaptive. Now the trick here is to use subdivision level 2 instead of 1, and the reason is I'm not exporting the displacement maps in relation to the lowest level, which is the LR, the low resolution I exported. I'm exporting them in relation to the MR. And the reason I do this is because instead of bringing the lowest resolution to Maya, I'm gonna bring the mid resolution to Maya. So I can actually put the XGen and everything is gonna be groomed on top of the mid resolution model. That way, it's pretty close to the surface. The hair is gonna be close to the surface. I don't like using a scalp separate from the model. I actually like grooming in the model itself. So that's why I use a mid-res model instead of the lowest res. And then and that's why I export the displacements in relation to the second level instead of the first level. So adaptive, DP subfix, those 2 options in here, if you add, when you're exporting displacement maps that are not HD, this takes forever to export. But because they are HD, this improves the quality quite a bit and it's just as fast. So I always use those ones cranked. By default, this is 0.5 in here for the mid level. But Arno expects 0. And what that means is, so the base ground is actually at 0.5 by default. So that means if you're exporting a 16-bit maps, you're gonna see level of gray is gonna be the mid level. And then you're gonna see darker tones and lighter tones, right? So that's basically like for 16-bit maps. But if you're exporting 32-bit maps, that's basically the case in here in EXR. That means that the color can go negative. So if you have black, you can go below black, like minus. So basically, like if you use the mid level at 0, at 32 bits, you should be able to capture, even though if you open in Photoshop, it's gonna look like the map is completely black. If you start like playing with the contrast, the exposure in there, you're gonna see that the detail shows up at some point, it's like it's all there. So that's basically what Arnold expects by default is mid 0. So let's do this. And then no 16 because we don't want to do that. We're going to use 32 bits. And then we're going to give a name to this tool. So to make sure the names of the file is going to, the texture is going to be saved correctly, make sure that you name this correctly as well. So before exporting, you can just do like a renaming here. You can just do like a old lady this map, something like that. You can even add like a number if you want to. And then go to plugin. Let's double check. So displacement. File names UDIM, right? Switch morph target under displacement adaptive, subdivision level 2, not 1. DP subpix 4, 0 for mid, 32 in the XR. No smooth UVs, no 3 channels, everything else looks good. So let's just create maps. And let's prepare while this is exporting. We're gonna save always a set of source images under our Maya project, right? Source images. And that's gonna be our first set of maps exported. So let's do this. And that should take a couple of minutes. So probably not that that slow because at this point we don't have like detail everywhere in the face, right? It's just like very specific areas. So it should be faster. So I'm hoping like 6 minutes or so. So meanwhile, we're gonna go back to Maya here and we're gonna set up the scene. So basically what I have for the lady here is a very basic subsurface scattering shader. Very basic. It just has the right scale, but there's no textures assigned or anything, right? So let me pass to you guys the settings I have here so far, which is like definitely going to be going over the whole shader network, but this is just like a very basic one. So I'm just going to go graph material. So I have this one called skin, and you're going to see the parameters are very basic. So I have like the base in here. You can completely ignore this because I'm using a subsurface scattering. And if you have subsurface scattering cranked all the way to 1, which is the case here for the weight, basically this becomes unused. So this is going to be used every time you have subsurface under 1. So that means this is going to be blending with this color here, with the diffuse, right? So if you're using 1, basically subsurface is going to be all that's going to be taken into account. So we're going to just turn this one off. Base. It doesn't matter what I do here, it's not going to affect anything. So this is just like a very basic shader, so no textures, right? So that's basically the values I'm using for this. But obviously, later on, we're going to have to tweak this whole thing. Even for the color of this packing here, I'm actually not using full-on white, so it's like 0.825. And then anything that works for the scene in there. No transmission because there's no transparency. Subsurface scattering, I'm using this coloring here, which is kind of desaturated for the color of the skin. And I'm using those values, so close to 20 and then 0.178 and 0.630. And then for the color of the skin itself, if you go to Arnold manual, Arnold's manual recommends, like the online one they have, for skin they recommend like 1 for the red. And then this one for the green is 0.35 and the blue is 0.2. So basically like 1, 0.35 and 2. So that's basically like the default skin. But the thing is like sometimes I feel that it looks too saturated and the scatter becomes a little bit too dominant. So the way it works is basically like this. They talk about like the different layers of the skin being controlled by those different colors in here. So it's a matter of like how you want to, it's like to tweak those colors to create more or less of an effect of skin. But in her case, I start tweaking and I reach like those values in here, which, it's working for her in this case. But obviously later on, I'm going to see during the model, the other renders, how this plays out, but I like the tone that I got in there. This is like a raw render. Obviously I can color correct this and get the redness a little bit more shifted towards magenta or whatever you want to do, but the color in there seems fine. I'm using random walk, and then my scale at this point is 0.125. I play with these values, it can be between like 0.115 to 0.140 sometimes, 135 I would say would be kind of like the limit for me, but I went as far as 140 at some point. But I would say 115 to 140 to 135 would be a good spot. So I have like right in the middle, so 125 random walk, and then the coat I have at 0.15, and then roughness at 500, which is spread out. It's like a secondary spec, and then index of refraction is at 1.55. So let's get this back here, and let's set up the scene for a render, for our first render. So I have my skin in place in there. I'm just going to minimize this. And I'm going to delete this lady altogether. I'm going to import an OBJ. Make sure that the OBJ all the way down there is single object, right? Otherwise, it's going to come all chopped. I'm going to import. And then let's get this one here. So I'm going to import not the low res. Remember the low res we used to import as a morph target, but the mid res is the one we're going to import to Maya. So we're going to click that one, import it. There she is. And now let's do a couple of things. So you see, it's not going to affect the renders, but if it's bothering you, if it's all faceted like that, you can click on it and you can go to your mesh display and then just say soft edge. So that smooths things out, right? So at least visually is more pleasing. And then now we're going to have to set up this model for Arnold to recognize as a model that's being subdivided for render. So it's very simple to do. You're going to click the model itself. And then you're going to see the properties attribute editor here. If it doesn't show up, you can just press Control A. So it's going to show up right there. And then in the second tab, see the first tab, you have this stuff in here, the translate, rotate, blah, blah, blah. The second one, you have Arnold tab right here. And the first thing you're going to notice is that this thing here, for example, opaque, you're only going to turn this one off when you're rendering transparent objects, because you want to make sure that the shadows are transparent as well, right? Unless you're using caustics, and in that case, it needs to be opaque. It's very stupid, I know, but it has to be opaque, otherwise it doesn't calculate it. So in our case here, she doesn't have transparent shadows, so keep it on. And then the first thing you're going to set is this, SS set name. So I normally use this name here, shared SSS. And the reason we're going to use this is because, for example, like if you're rendering an eyeball and the skin in the same scene, if you don't have them matching the same SSS set name, it's going to create like a darker area in between them. So the transition is not going to be nice and smooth. But if you have all the objects matching the same, all the objects in contact with each other, obviously. So like eyeball, if you have teeth, for example, try to match them with the same SSS name, set name. So they actually blend together and it becomes part of the same system, you know? So the subsurface scattering is calculated as if it was like a single object instead of like multiple objects. It looks very nice to transitions. So this is the first thing we set, and then we're gonna go to subdivision. By default, we have 0 here, like none. I'm gonna subdivide this Catmull Clark, and I'm gonna start with a 3. That should be fast enough. But to get more detail, for those pores, I would say 4 would be ideal. In this case, sometimes even 5. So I'm going to try 3 first, and then I can show you the difference between them. I'm not going to change this one. And then for the adaptive space, I'm going to put object. And then for the UV smoothing, you're going to put like linear, because I'm not smoothing the UVs at all. Smoothing UVs is a recipe for getting seams, you know. So if you can keep everything linear, completely square, I can show you here. UV editor. Everything very square like that. I mean, like, you know, you look at this area here, it doesn't have like a nice curvature. It's a square, right? Everything is faceted. So that's basically what we need to prevent, you know, having seams, you know. It's more likely to have seams if you have everything smooth. So that's basically it. Catmull Clark 3, I'm going to switch to 4 very soon. Object, linear, and then displacement attributes. So this scalar 0 value is 0, just like we set in ZBrush. So that's all set already. And then for auto bump is pretty cool because remember we're exporting stuff from HD. And if you're subdividing only 3 times, how come we're going to be able to represent like 70 million polygons, right, worth of detail? It's not going to do that. So what's going to do is going to subdivide to, let's say, 1 million polygons, just like we had at the highest before HD. And then everything that's HD is going to be shifted towards auto bump. So it's going to be like a bump that's going to be created during render time. It's not something you have access to, but it's just going to be rendered as bump map instead of like actually displacing it, you know. So it's very smart, actually. I like this feature quite a lot. So now we have it set. Let's go back to our texture here, to our shader, sorry. And I'm going to assign this shader. So select the model. I'm gonna right click right here and then say assign material to viewport selection, or you can just drag and drop too, it works. So now I have the texture in there, but I don't have the shader, sorry, but I don't have any displacement map assigned just yet. So let's look at our ZBrush. So it exported like 5 8K maps in 4 minutes, but that's because we don't have a lot of detail going on yet. Once you have the entire thing covered with pores and wrinkles and all, it should be higher than this, right? Depending on your machine as well. But 4 minutes to export like 5 8K maps is really amazing, if you ask me. You know, it's not going to happen if you have regular sub-Ds. So now let's go and explore our shader network a little bit more. So we have like skin right here. Let's switch back in here. So the skin is selected. And then there is one button in here. That's this guy here. You can click on it. Or if you don't have access to it, you can click this little guy here, the stop node. So this is the main shader, but this is the top surface shader that you're going to need. And then in this one, you can plug your displacement shader as well. So if you click this guy here instead of this, right, you have access to displacement material. Or you can do that by selecting the shader itself, like this one, and then clicking this little guy right here, and that should open the same thing. So it goes basically goes to the hierarchy, right? Like goes to the higher level, and then it has access to that top node in there. So if you click the displacement of material, I'm gonna source the file. I'm gonna click again this little arrow right there. And now I'm back to the map, right? Where I'm gonna plug my displacement map. So I'm gonna switch the first thing, the filter type, I'm gonna put like off. I don't need any filter. And I scroll all the way down. And in Arnold, if you have enough memory, turn off your auto generate textures, right? Because you want it to rate, you don't wanna regenerate them every time you render. And if you don't have a lot of memory, then it's up to you to actually keep this one to generate the TX texture, so it's easier to render heavier scenes with less memory. But I'm gonna turn it off in my case. And then let's go back here. And then let's see the map where it is. So let's click the image, source it here. Let's go to my folder, personal projects. Let's see. This one, and then source images. Okay, so this one here, if I click any of those maps, it could be anyone. You can click like 4, for example, right? Those are all part of the same family. They have like the UDIM number. You see the map looks a little bit reddish in there. It's totally normal. So it can be anyone as long as they are part of the same family. So displacement map. So I'm gonna click this one and open. And by default, it only loads one map, right? So because you're using UDIMs, make sure you click this UV tiling mode and click in UDIM Mari in here. So now you found the 5 files. So you replace the 1004 with a tag that says UDIM. So that means anything that has the same radical for the name, it's going to replace and basically like bring any number that's part of the family there, right? And then remember when you set up our ACES, you know, the ACES profile for the coloring, we create a rule in there that says that anything that's EXR is going to be converted to linear sRGB. So that's basically what it's doing here. If you didn't set it up, you can do this manually. You can just go and click Utility Linear sRGB. And to be able to see all those things in here, those different ones, you have to install the ACES that we went through at the very beginning. So make sure you see that, and that should be good. So that should be good to go. So we have everything set. And let's try to do a little rendering here and see what happens. Let's see how slow or fast this is going to be. And sometimes you're not going to see the detail straight away. So we have to crank the, you know, the intensity a little bit sometimes, or reduce the intensity of the color. So let's see, let's just render and see if we get that little detail we just put in there. Okay, she's coming like that. Like, let's just isolate one area. For example, this one here, close to the muzzle, right here. Maybe where the light is on. And I might need to actually crank the specular a little bit more. So I can definitely see that there's something there. Let's just get her to, let's zoom in a little bit, like that. Let's try something like this. Oops. And maybe like the spec, I can actually crank a little bit so we can actually see what's going on. let's isolate this area around right there. Yeah, you're starting to see, it looks a little soft, but it's because, again, like I'm using a very soft light source, and also my specular is very, very soft as well. So it becomes a little bit harder to see the detail, you know. But depending on how you have your scene set up, especially if you have like a very strong light with sharper shadows, you're gonna be able to see this stuff a lot more. And obviously the color, if you go, for example, darker in here, just as an example, let's just bring this one to a darker tone. That's why you need textures to be able to see what's going on in there. So let's do a little bit of both. Let's just crank this this specular. Let's put like let's see, a 200 here, and then let's do the color, the surface color, gonna make her much darker skin. Let's see if we can see a little bit more. To save those for evaluation later, the way it works here in the render view is like you go to your view and then store snapshot. So that one is stored right there. Have access when you need. Let's render this one with a slightly more specular and darker tone. Let's see if we can see a little bit more. Yeah, you're starting to see this, the pores like between this and this, right? Much more visible. It has to do with obviously the lighting, right? Sometimes it looks too soft in your scenes. Start playing with the lighting, you know, and you're gonna start seeing more and more detail. And obviously, when you start putting the actual textures in place, right, like for the skin color and all this stuff, the albedo, then you're definitely gonna be able to see more and more detail. But it's good to start without any textures, just like to see the surface detail itself, you know. There are a couple of things here you can actually use to diagnose sometimes. For example, if I click, if you go to render, there's this debug shading here. If you click, for example, basic, it's gonna show like a very, very fast render of the displacement. You can do like lighting, for example. So it's gonna show a fast render without any of the subsurface scattering, right? You have one just for the occlusion, wireframe, which is like, it's a lot of geometry to see wireframe. There's a normal in here. For example, if you have access to an application that can actually light the entire scene using the normal, you can actually, you know, just export straight from here. I think like there was like a plugin for After Effects at some point. You could lighten a scene based on something like that, you know. You have the UV, you have primitive, and then you have the object ID, which is really cool. For example, you have multiple objects. Each one of them is going to be assigned to a different color. And then you can use those colors to mask, you know, for post-processing and stuff. But this is very useful, you know, it's like just to see if the detail is coming through, like in this case here, right? But sometimes it's just the subsurface is too strong and then you don't see it. So it's good to have that available in there. But yeah, guys, I think that's it for today. You know, it's like we're definitely going to be doing more iterations on those renders, but not before you do a lot of more details. Going to get more into like wrinkles tomorrow. So I'm going to keep working on my pores tonight. Like I said, around the cheeks and then chin, stuff like that. Maybe like some eyebrows, forehead, whatever. Those areas like are more likely to have orange peel kind of look. And then everything in between, we're going to leave for tomorrow. And we're going to be working on that together, you know. And I think that covers this whole thing about like from the pore to the first render. And that's something that we did everything during the class today. So if you have any questions, if something didn't work, make sure you go through all the steps. There's always like a little detail that sometimes is you know, left. And then that's the one that causes the whole trouble. And so make sure you follow the steps, you know, it's like to be able to generate your first like displacement maps. And then we talk more tomorrow. There's a lot to cover, man. And I'm excited to see where this lady goes. I keep changing her every day. So, and I hope you guys are excited too. You know, it's like there's a lot of cool ideas. I'm pretty sure you guys are going to come up with more stuff. And then there's a lot of likeness stuff as well. And one thing I have to mention is that I got 2 emails about the licenses for the ZWrap. So if any of you guys still need it, just make sure you send me an email. You know, you didn't send me an email, right?
I sent an email to the website.
Oh, through the website.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna check. Yeah. So
Okay.
so you're missing one.
Yeah, a quick question or 2 quick questions.
Yes.
One of them might not be quick, but you can give me a quick answer on it.
Yeah.
Should we use the auto bump thing on the eyes?
On the eyes, that's a good question. I think so. Yeah. If you have something like if you're adding a lot of detail, for example, micro detail in the iris when you're sculpting it, I would say, yeah, use it. It doesn't hurt. You don't need
just in the iris, though?
Yeah, the iris for sure. Yeah, for both of them, actually. Like, let's see. Like, for the... Yeah, I would do them both of them because the eye itself, the eyeball, we're going to have, like, the micro veins. So it's nice if you can capture everything. Maybe you don't have enough if you don't have it, you know?
Okay, and also, this you can say yes or no to.
Yeah.
Can we sculpt after we start with the hair? Like, say we do the peach fuzz, can we still sculpt after that and bring it back in? And it will...
Oh, we sculpt the model itself? Yes. Yeah. Yes, definitely. So I can show you the pipeline, or we can actually wait until we get like to the hair itself. But the way it works, like in general lines, is like this. So you have your model right now, this one. So let's say I go back to ZBrush now and I do a bunch of sculpture. I change the size of the head, rotation, whatever it is. So what I do, so for example, you can do this, I can do this now just to show you exactly what I meant. So for example, I have my old lady in there. We're just gonna add something like this. So I'm gonna export this lady as another MR. So this is gonna be like MR1 temp. So just for a test. And now
it's beautiful.
So what I'm gonna do now, let's see if my render is not running in the background here. Yeah, it is. All right, let's stop it. So I'm gonna import that model straight away. So make sure that matches the same number of polygons, right? It has to be the same resolution. So import, let's see, old lady temp. So now I have both models, this one and that one, right? So I'm gonna click the new one first. If I go to outliner, it's gonna show like it's the last object here. The last one, it has a bunch of the poly groups that come as well. But I'm gonna just click the model itself. And then I'm gonna click with Control, the old lady, the previous model, right? So now you can say this, I can just go to Deform, create blend shape. And I can just give a name like very smart like that. I don't need to check for topology, so apply. And now, if I go to AAA and I just like do this, based like the other model assumes that same position, based like he conforms to the new model. And then at this point here, if I delete the previous model, that's gonna disappear. The change is gonna disappear because it's not baked yet. So in order to keep it, you just keep both of them selected, and you can go to your edit, delete by type history, not to be confused with delete all by type history. Don't do that. To the delete by type history. And then that's gonna do just for the selected models. So now I can delete the previous one. Not the previous, but the latest one I just imported, gonna delete it. And that's basically our original one. And the reason why I'm deleting the new one and not the previous one is because this previous one, we have all the things assigned to it. The skin, we have like the Arnold stuff you just added, like the shared SSS, all this stuff is gonna be preserved. And from this point on, if you have the hair is gonna conform to that. Obviously, if the hair, you have hair guides, you have to make sure that they are not gonna be spiking in a very weird way, because now you're changing a lot of the forms. But that's basically the way I do it. And one thing I do before that, I do anything with morph target, I basically turn off all the XGen stuff. Just make sure you have everything hidden, because if you have everything visible, when you switch to morph targeting, there's going to take forever for it to calculate the new position. And if you have like hidden, then it basically like pops kind of like faster, you know. So
perfect. Thank you very much.
No problem, man.
Sorry, buddy.
Yeah, and I'm gonna send you the license, and then I talk to you guys tomorrow.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Stay safe, guys.